a report back from Linden Jenkins. While the news is understandably focused on Iran, we must not let that crisis divert our attention away from the genocide of the people in Gaza and the Israeli government's crimes that our government is enabling in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Syria, Lebanon, and elsewhere. This evening's presentation is brought to you by Massachusetts Peace Action. MAPA is a volunteer-fueled organization. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to develop the sustained political power to foster a more just and peaceful U.S. foreign policy. MAPA is the Massachusetts chapter of the National Peace Group, Peace Action, the nation's largest grassroots peace and disarmament membership organization with more than 100,000 members and 30 chapters across the country. Tonight's webinar is from Massachusetts Peace Action, or MAPA's working group, the Gaza Working Group, one of many working groups at MAPA, which you can see on our website. If during the presentation you have questions, please drop them into the chat and Linden will address them after her presentation. So now I will introduce Linden Jenkins, a retired lawyer and professional mediator who started and ran a solo practice law firm on the border of Maine and New Hampshire, practicing civil law in both states. She took a mid-career turn to start a restorative justice nonprofit where she created and ran a parent-child mediation program and a juvenile court diversion program. Her careers and 50 plus years as a social justice activist are grounded in her Quaker faith. She served as head of the New England Quakers from 2008 through 2011. And in 2015, recognizing shared spiritual qualities between Quakers and Catholics, she took a course for people inquiring about Catholicism, leading her to join a Catholic parish in 2015, as Linden says, appreciating God's great sense of humor. But her dearest activities are her roles of mother and grandmother. Linden currently lives on the unceded Massachusetts land of Cambridge, also called Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you very much, Linden. Looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Well, thank you, Pat. And I want to thank MAPA and Cole and Noble on here tonight and all of the groups that have been part of my endeavors and so many of this work. I also want to thank my families and friends and comrades who have supported and accompanied me and continue to do that, especially since I have organized my life to live as a tax resister below the taxable income line. So material support has been generously afforded to me and allowed me to do the work that I have been doing. And I also want to thank the indigenous communities that have welcomed me and allowed me to participate, hopefully, in the roles to which I aspire as ally and accomplice on Turtle Island. And in that regard, I do acknowledge that everyone in this meeting is on land that continues to be bound by and to the presence and dynamic sustainable relationships of millennia of generations of indigenous peoples. And beyond the naming of this reality, I acknowledge a responsibility to embody the acknowledgement. And to that end, I try to dedicate my most precious things, my time and attention, to cultivating and being in solidarity with these people and these relationships. This is what took me to Palestine, and it's what brings me here tonight. I also take deep pleasure in thanking the amazing people that I met and who also welcomed and supported and allowed me to accompany them in Palestine from late August to late November of 2024. And in the interest of protecting them in this time of apparently proliferating evil, I will not often use individuals' names or even names of particular places because we know, or we should know, that our governments are masters of surveillance, oppression, and cruelty. So I'm going to divide the time into 4 sections this evening. I'm going to give a little introductory narrative about what took me there and why, and then give some samples of my experiences with slides and commentary. And after the slides, some reflections on growing edges of my sense of the relevance for us of the facts on the ground in Palestine and here. And then we will have Q&A and discussion. I think just before that, we'll have some action items that will be offered to you as well. And I do have an informal resource list that we'll send out with the recording that I think everybody who registered will be getting after this event. So now, briefly, I want to tell you what took me to Palestine. Not because I am particularly a unique person, but because I believe that I am one of hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are on similar pilgrimages, not perhaps featuring the same places or people, but the same intentionality, the same care, the same concerns. And so this is a story of our time, and I hope it will be an invitation to you to recognize the ways that you are showing up for the world around us. As infinite and distinctive as we each are, as I have learned from my indigenous elders of all ages, we are all not only precious, but essential for the work that is before us. So I'll say first, I'm a little nervous. I've given 4 talks since I got back in November, but each one is different. And so I ask for your accompaniment as well. So the roots of the situation in Palestine, from my perspective, really began in 2011 when I became involved with Occupy Boston. And it was in that community, as you have heard, I'm a retired lawyer and mediator. I heard there for the first time about the doctrine of Christian discovery, also known as the doctrine of Christian domination. And as a retired lawyer, I was shocked to learn at that time that this doctrine is part of the bedrock of our legal system. As recently as 2005, Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the majority decision in a case called City of Sherrill versus Oneida Indian Nation of New York that named the doctrine of discovery as binding legal precedent for the recognition that conquest is the legitimate source of property rights in lands that have been stolen or acquired by conquest of indigenous Americans, indigenous Native Americans here. And that recognition, she named the doctrine of discovery as a keystone, really, of our whole legal system. That was really shocking to me. And I continue to investigate the sources and articulations of this doctrine, and I see more and more how it reflects the values and priorities that permeate the dominant culture, down to and including our interpersonal relationships. My exploration of that went on most recently in 2021. I spent 8 weeks out on Line 3 in northern Minnesota. I went out with an affinity group from Extinction Rebellion that I've been part of since 2019. And out there, I was living in 2 of the 6 resistance camps that were started and led by indigenous women, Anishinaabe women and their communities. And the camps were on the pipeline route in the woods with no water or electricity. It was very challenging, but probably the most challenging part was living in intentional community in an anti-racist, anti-white supremacist culture. And in those communities, the Palestinian situation was always in the foreground. It was part of the conversation because the Native people there regard Palestinians as their siblings. They are indigenous people who are undergoing the same kind of genocidal treatment that Native Americans and Native Canadians have experienced and continue to experience on Turtle Island. So that was also a very large role in what led me to go in 2024. A lot has been written about the doctrine of discovery. You can Google it. There are many wonderful resources, and on the resource list that you'll get from me, there are some that are available to you. But I want to tell you a little bit more so that you can have a better understanding of my experiences, because this was certainly a filter through which I went and traveled through Palestine, going on an interfaith delegation that was composed of rabbis for ceasefire and Christians for ceasefire, and led by Sabeel, which is a Palestinian Liberation Theology Center that is located in East Jerusalem. And we were guided by the director of that center. And I had arranged with the director, Omar Harami, to stay after the 10-day duration of the delegation in order to volunteer in their office in East Jerusalem. And I boarded with a Palestinian Christian woman in Beit Hanina, which is a neighborhood of East Jerusalem, for the 3 months that I was there, in addition to traveling with the delegations, helping to plan and travel with the delegations that Sabeel was leading, and on my own as well. So I just want to backtrack a little bit to this doctrine of discovery business, because it is foundational, not just for the situation there, but the situation here. That term, doctrine of discovery, refers to the content of documents that were issued by the popes of the Roman Catholic Church in the 14 and 1500s, directing the rulers of Christian nation states and their agents to go out across the globe, go out into the world, and use any means necessary to subjugate and conquer and acquire the people who did not acknowledge Christianity and their property, including their land. So this was it was quite a bold series of statements directing these rulers to use force to subjugate the indigenous people of lands all over the world. I remember reading in my AP history class in high school about the line of demarcation that was drawn through from north to south through the Western Hemisphere, and the Portuguese were allowed to settle on the east of that line and the Spanish on the west of that line by the Pope. And that's why Brazil speaks Portuguese, and most of the other countries speak Spanish. But the doctrine of discovery was not the first time that this narrative was mobilized and put into effect to justify actions. It really relies on what's known as the chosen people promised land narrative that really arises out of scripture, starting in the book of Genesis, when Yahweh, the Hebrew God, directs Abraham to go to Canaan and essentially ethnically cleanse Canaan, telling Abraham and his descendants, and this is reiterated in other books in the Old Testament, that the Israelites are the chosen people, and they are to go and really the summary of the descriptive words in the scriptures result in ethnic cleansing. He's directing them to ethnically cleanse the territory there, and this was shocking. I have to say, this was shocking to me. I, of course, have read the Bible all my life. I come to my faith relatively late in my life. But I've also been a writer and a poet, and I was told to read the King James Version of the Bible as the most foundational text for a writer in the English language. So I've read these texts for decades, but certainly reading them now with the new sensitivity, they take on a whole new meaning. And I offer that as an exercise for yourself too, to go back and look at the scriptures, because it's the foundation of Christian Zionism, Christian nationalism, and this chosen people promised land narrative is also the basis for Jewish Zionism, which arose in the 1840s and has been evolving since that time, and resulted in the formation of the state of Israel. Okay, so so those are the roots that and this narrative, was, as I mentioned, it was in the mouths of the Crusaders. It was in the mouths of the explorers during the so-called Age of Discovery, the Age of Exploration. It was in the mouths of the settlers going across the continent here in North and South America under the doctrine of manifest destiny that was articulated by the men in power that were making a lot of money off of this genocide, really taking the land from the native people that were here and encouraging Europeans to come and be the settlers that acquire the land and build their lives and their wealth on this land. And it's also in the mouths of the current administrations of both Israel and the United States. So it's a deep legacy that we all bear, and it's important for us to be mindful of that. Some of the impacts that I observed as we turn in a moment to the slides, I want to ask you to think about the similarities between how the US colonial relationship with indigenous people here over the past 500 years and continuing today resembles how the US government and the Israeli government is practicing settler colonial occupation in Palestine. And some examples I offer is the way, for example, that foods and food practices have been captured, co-opted, and stolen. In the United States, we have the complete fabrication of the great food holiday of Thanksgiving, that the narrative is a complete fabrication and distortion of the actual relations between the Europeans and the native people. And I'm not aware of a similar narrative off the top of my head, but certainly there are lots of foods that I know of in Israel, Palestine, that now have been claimed to be originating with the Jewish culture, like falafel and hummus and halva. These things originated with the Palestinian culture, and their origins have been erased. So I think those are examples of the arena of food that is one way, one sort of dimension of erasure and colonial distortion. Resource extraction practices involving water is another area that I'll mention as we look at the slides. And that's been a locus of oppression in the US indigenous relations and also between Israel and Palestine. And of course, the actual confiscation of land itself in the many different ways that white people and Euro-Americans came into possession of land here. And we're witnessing this in real time in Palestine, that so many different ways are being used to deprive people of their land. Also, another area is language erasure, practices where people are or have been forbidden to use their languages, their indigenous languages, and their place names have been changed, and there's corruption of various kinds that has been visited on their language uses. So those are some examples. Now I'd like to try to get to the slides. If I can do this. So I have to share my screen. And these are, Okay, forget what I have to do here. Share. I forgot how I have to get this to expand. Right, here we go. Okay. All right, so this first slide is actually here in Massachusetts. I've begun previously, I've done work in prisons, and I'm beginning to do that again. And when I saw this yellow gate, I was struck. This is shortly after I got back. This is the entrance to Old Colony Medium Security Correctional Facility down in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. And it's exactly the same as the kind of gates that we saw in Palestine. This is one that was, you can see on the right, that was I photographed from the bus that we were in. This is what's called a checkpoint in Palestine that is installed arbitrarily by the Israeli governments all over the place in order to contain and control and oppress and harass arbitrarily the Palestinian people. So this yellow gate is swung closed whenever they feel like blocking the entrance. And just since I was there in November, there have been 300 additional checkpoints installed in the West Bank. And you may have heard that, particularly since the bombing this weekend, excuse me, just a minute. I've heard that people are completely locked into their cities and towns. They cannot leave because they've installed these gates. They also just use bulldozers and they plow up big piles of dirt. But I just wanted to start off showing you one very concrete way that what is going on here is going on there. And of course, I think probably many of you are aware that the United States has been sending its police to be trained actually in Israel for a very long time. So I wanted to recap what some of you may know, the actual establishment, the progression of the loss of land in Palestine that began actually in 1948 when the United Nations agreed to partition the territory in order to create the land, the nation state of Israel. And so on the far left, you can see the state of Jewish land, the white areas. This was in 1946, 2 years before the partition. And then in 1947, moving to the right, is the plan that was brought for consideration in 47 and actually adopted in 48. And then moving again to the right, 49 through 67, the Israeli government and the settlers began to steal and conquer the land that they wanted. And so the Palestinian controlled land continued to shrink. And then you can see on 2011 what it looked like. It was becoming more like what Swiss cheese. This is actually in 2011. So this map is outdated, but pretty much any map that's ever made is almost instantly outdated because there are settlers that continue to pour into Israel and the occupied territories. Many of them are American Jews that go to live in these settlements, and they're given significant financial incentives to do that. And so that these settlers are subsidized, given very nice accommodations and with very low cost, and supported by the Israeli government. This was actually we flew to Amman, Jordan, and entered over the Jordanian border into the West Bank. But we could see instantly that where it's green, like here, this is green, this is where the Israelis are given access to water, which is not true of Palestinians. Most Palestinians don't know how much water every day they're going to have access to. So they install tanks on their holding tanks on the roofs of their buildings. But and this was the Dead Sea on our way to the border. We could see it. And here we have the Jordan River, such as it was, which has been completely shrunk because, again, it has its source in the Sea of Galilee in the north of the occupied territories, but Israel has commandeered the water in very similar ways that the U.S. government and different municipal governments have done, particularly in the southwestern part of the United States. And here we are approaching the border. We had been told that we could not photograph, or if we tried to photograph the actual border, the soldiers and the military, we would do that at our peril. And as a matter of fact, one of our group did, in his enthusiasm to see a friend that he hadn't expected to see, pulled out his camera in the security building on the Israeli side of the border, and was instantly set upon by the security guards that took him aside. And we waited several hours for him, but he was not released. They took his phone, they erased everything on his phone, and did not let him enter the country at all. So he had to actually turn around and go home. And this is actually emblematic of the fact that there is no rule of law for non-Israelis in Israel and in the West Bank. The soldiers and the police can do pretty much whatever they want when they want to. Oops. There we go. And the landscape everywhere is militarized. We would see these bunkers and barbed wire fences just everywhere we rode through the countryside. This is again on the way to Jerusalem. And here are the water tanks on top of the Palestinian residences, just on the outskirts of Palestine. And this is Damascus Gate of the old city. We went directly from the border to Jerusalem. So this is the old city of Jerusalem. Interestingly, these walls are relatively new. They're about 500 years old, and the current surface of the old city is probably about 2 stories above the original or the level that existed when Jesus walked there. But because of the situation on the ground, there are no tourists, and this is what the old city looks like. These doors on the side are storefronts that normally would be open with their wares extending out into the street, and there would be, throngs of people. But really, the whole time I was there was hardly anyone there. So the economy has really collapsed, and it's a big hardship. I think there have been hundreds of thousands of Israelis who have actually emigrated from the country. But of course, Palestinians do that at their peril. If they're allowed to leave, they most probably will not be allowed to come back. And again, one of the streets in the evening, this is the Dome of the Rock, which is a sacred site, sacred to Jews and Christians and Muslims as well, and a hot spot in the city. But you can see there's hardly anyone here. This is still Jerusalem, actually, on the outskirts. And this is Omar, who had taken us to visit a community, a Palestinian community that had been evacuated. The Israelis want to build something like a theme park here, but it's listed on a UNESCO site as a historic landmark. So because there's been significant international pressure against developing it commercially, the buildings stand empty. But the Palestinian families that have lived there for generations have been forced out to find shelter wherever they can. And this is a little bit closer up. But it's kind of mind-boggling, even though it was not the purpose of my trip to visit the holy sites. There are many Palestinian families that trace their family trees back to the time of Jesus and to various early times. It's quite extraordinary to hear their stories and all that they know about their extended families in a way that we really don't. So this is a refugee camp in Jerusalem, Shufat refugee camp that we went to visit. So there are 22 refugee camps in Israel, Palestine that have come into being since 1948. They all started as tents, but people have been living in them for 75 years or so, and so they've built permanent residences and structures for themselves, even though the Israelis forbid them access to any kind of permitting process or infrastructure that would allow regulation of their construction. And so it's very convenient when the Israelis don't like someone or they want a piece of property, they just say that the people don't have a permit, and so they will bring bulldozers in. Sometimes they'll give them advance notice, sometimes they don't, and totally destroy their homes. And they can do that for any number of reasons or for no reason at all. So we were on the outside. You can see the watchtower there just behind the bus. And this was the entry into the camp. You can see the sidewalk to the left is kind of a reverse L shape. There's some women proceeding that way, but we couldn't take any photos closer than this. But again, you can see that it's barbed wire fencing, and people can be harassed and detained at these checkpoints, again, for no reason at all, and for however long the security guards want to detain them, and can take their documentation, can take their property, and there's really no recourse. So it's a real state of lawlessness there. Here you can see that we're inside the camp, and Palestinians have used the wall on the separation wall on the left as a painting service for murals. And here we were interacting with some of the local school kids, and this is their school that was right behind where we were standing. This is an UNRWA school, and you can see the bullet holes strafing through the facade. Again, this is where we were, right? And the very next day, there were police and tear gas and bullets flying right here. So it was a very tense time to be there, but Omar has relationships with people all over the region and has his ear to the ground. And so our itinerary would change often daily, depending upon the movement of police and troops, and the word of mouth that he would get about the likelihood of danger. So it was tense. You're interacting with people who have been living under these conditions and don't have the protection of the international passport that we do. And so the stress of that over the decades is really actually hard to
Hi, Linden. This is your 15-minute warning.
15 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go quicker. This is always the challenge. Yeah. So we visited. This was an encampment of Bedouins, who are indigenous people who are historically nomadic people, but also they have been forced off their land repeatedly. And so we visited their encampment, and this is one of our members, teaching some of the kids, because of course they have no school. They're out here with no resources, no infrastructure. You can see in the background the green again, and behind over Will's right shoulder, you see some structures. That's a power station for the surrounding Israeli settlements. Of course, the Palestinians don't have any access to that whatsoever. And furthermore, the settlers that are living nearby come in the night and they wake them up, beating them in their sleep. They set this car on fire. This is, the one vehicle that they had. And so they live in terror, but they're trying to cling to this land. They're committed to that. And here we are playing soccer with some of the kids and some of the residents of the encampment. So it's a way to offer them some protective presence and some diversion and solidarity. Again, the contrast. This is a Christian community outside of Bethlehem, the Almacour Valley, where the Casilla family has been trying to hold on to land that has been in their family for over 100 years. This was a temporary structure that they had erected where we went to meet. Oh, I wanted to show you, if I can go back. Oh, that's all right, I'll show you in the next one. Yeah, this is the two women in the middle are sisters-in-law, and they have been trying to mobilize international support to help them to hold on to their land. And they work. This is the second time we went, when there was a press conference of religious leaders, and we actually walked up this road to the boundary line of the Casilla family land, where there was some military there. You can see them on the right. And we sat down at the feet of the military, just as a way, again, to be in solidarity with the people and to maintain their presence on the land and offer some measure of protection. We were there about a half an hour singing and chanting, and then suddenly we got up and left, and come to find out that Omar and some of the men behind us had been able to overhear that the guards had gotten permission to use tear gas on us, and so they moved us out of there before they mobilized that. So that was just another way that we were protected. And this was the third time that I went back, when that tent you had seen earlier was demolished by the Israelis, and this temporary church, because this is a Christian family, but many of the people who come in solidarity are Jews and Muslims and Bedouins. So they erected this church as a way, again, of just sustaining their claim. This is Reverend Munther Isaac on the left, who you may have heard of. He has been the pastor and theologian in Bethlehem. He's actually moving to Ramallah, and you can see the soldiers over Alice's shoulder. And I think because there was a large international contingent of us there, they didn't bother us that day. This was a Jewish friend who also was participating in the interfaith service there into the evening, as you can see. And this was a member of Rabbis for Human Rights, who was also in partnership with this family. So they're maintaining this interfaith community, which existed before 1948, and they are insistent that this is what they want how they want to live in the future. Another Jewish rabbi from the northern part of Israel. And then 2 days later, the Israelis brought this tractor and a big truck, and they didn't demolish the church, but they dismantled it and loaded it up on the truck and took it away because they can. Just more militarized stuff. This was actually at the Gaza border. We went and we had a prayer service. You can see they're building the wall here. It was at one of the crossings, and we actually created a prayer service using a kafia as the altar. And the bandana that's being laid down there is one that I got on line 3, that we each brought something that was precious to us. And we had a prayer service there. That's the altar. And yeah, they didn't bother us. I think they were surprised. The military came and watched, but they didn't bother us. So it felt useful to be able to, again, be a small presence there. Yeah, here we are. And again, I went with a different delegation to the Gaza border. This is from a different location, but we could see the bombing. You can see the smoke from the bombing and the buildings or the rubble that remains there. And we also did an action on the US Embassy in Jerusalem, where we wore our t-shirts saying ceasefire now, arms embargo now, and had put red paint on our hands for blood on our hands, and actually six of us went in and had a conversation with the political officer for Israeli affairs about what we had seen and what kind of action we wanted. It was quite frustrating, very frustrating, but predictably frustrating conversation, but good that we went. And here are some pedestrians observing us again. Omar said that he thought that there had not been an action like this on the embassy since it had been moved there. And so they didn't quite know what to do with us. So there was some risk, but as internationals, you have, this is us coming from the meeting with the officer down to join the others. And there we are. And this was a demonstration in Ramallah of citizens of Ramallah, and they were protesting against the failure of other Arab nations to come to their defense. As we know, Yemen is really the only one that has taken substantive action. So it was interesting. This is Ramallah Friends School. I'm going to go by very quickly. They have lost a lot of money because of the USAID grants. And this was when I came back. I was able to go to Indigenous Peoples Day in Plymouth. And it was important as a regrounding for me when I came back to be able to reconnect with the Indigenous community here. This was a banner that says, "From Turtle Island to Palestine, colonialism is a crime, land back." So those are my slides. I'm not a professional photographer, so they're not of that quality. And I'm trying to find the cursor so that I can. Oh yeah, I just want to stop. Okay, here we go. Stop screen sharing. Yeah. So the final thing that I wanted to talk about before moving on to actions and the Q&A is that I've learned. I continue to learn. Since I've come back, I've been really motivated to continue to learn and. There's a Palestinian American lawyer named Noura Erakat who teaches at Rutgers, who recently, actually February 5th, wrote an article for the Boston Review that's called "The Boomerang Comes Back." And she credits her, really the source for her thinking on this is a Martinican philosopher and poet named Aimé Césaire, who in 1950 wrote an essay called Discourse on Colonialism. And he was the first one to really observe that the violence that colonizers visit on foreign populations inevitably boomerangs back onto the home metropole. And he talks about European colonizers who violently colonized in Africa and Asia. Noura Erakat wonders if perhaps he was thinking of the German extermination of the Nama and Harito people in Namibia during the brutal German colonial reign there of 1884 to 1915, which then, of course, was visited on their own population, Jews and many other categories of undesirable scapegoated people. And she, in this article, talks about how SWAT teams were first developed for use in Vietnam and then were used first domestically on the Black Panthers. So if we're not moved to care or to take action because of the nature of what's going on the ground in Palestine, we need to care because this is the violence that we are living with now. And more we can see what's happening here, the thuggery and the lawlessness that has been going on in Israel-Palestine for essentially 75 years, but under the radar until the Hamas uprising of October 7th. And with the sensitization that I experienced of my 3 months being in Palestine and in the reading that I'm continuing to do, I'm I'm finding more and more ways that what is going on there is what's going on here. So it's a bleak picture, and as we can see, it seems to be getting bleaker with every passing day. And I guess one thing that I'm holding on to myself personally is that hope is a fruit of humility, and that one way of thinking about humility is the centering of our own experience, really what we call individualism in the dominant culture of the West, where we aspire and we expect and we dream of being individual heroes, saviors, what have you, which is really wrongheaded. And it's the humility to step back from those aspirations, from celebrity culture, from attributing these characteristics to other people, can be a way for us to look for and be open to the miracle that we need, the paradigm shift that we need. And also, I think we really need to come into relationship with the indigenous people that are still very present everywhere on Turtle Island. And so I recommend, we will hear from Pat and perhaps from Cole other actions, but I do recommend doing your best to investigate the indigenous people and their communities that still reside in your neighborhood, in your locale, and taking the risk of going to their events. You can go to powwows. There are all kinds of things. There are all kinds of ways that you can show up for them and begin to come into relationship. To really become familiar with the wisdom and the history that has been erased. So that, I think I will end with that and hand it back over to you, Pat.
Right. Thank you very much, Linda. That was great to see what's happening on the ground now, to hear your connections between the indigenous people here and the attacks and attempts to eradicate the indigenous people in Palestine. Many of us here on this line are familiar with this, and good for me to see what it's like on the ground now. Some things just haven't changed and keep getting worse, but good for you to be there, to be in solidarity with them and let them know that people are still watching, listening, paying attention, but they are being seen and are being heard. So we do have some actions that we are suggesting people take before we get into the Q&A and perhaps some conversation with you. Cole's going to put those up here. I'm going to, and I don't know if you can make that, I can make those bigger. Preface this with letting people know that I have, in conversation with both my representative, Lori Trahan, with her staff and with staff at our senators' offices, who have told us that what our advocacy for Palestinians has made a difference. Our requests again and again and again, and reasons why we wanted them to call for a ceasefire, vote for certain bills, sign certain letters, is a main reason for why they have, in fact, taken some of the actions that they've taken. And our members of Congress are among the best in the country, our senators, which is a low bar. But we can thank them and keep pushing them further and further. So on the front burner right now, as everybody is well aware, is the terrible situation with Iran, that Israel has attacked Iran, that President Trump, after saying he forbidding international to do such a thing, and that we would not, in the middle of negotiations, has now changed his tactic. And that we, as it says here, Trump has joined Israel's attack, and this places threatens the people of the Middle East and our service members, and of course, people here and throughout the region, and that we must do everything that we can to try to urge our senators to use the tools that are provided that they have to try to stop this. Senator Kane and Representative Massey have both filed resolutions, war powers resolutions, that can trigger a vote in both the Senate and the House. And we ask people to ask Warren and Markey, and if you are listening from another state, please ask your senators to vote for the war powers resolution if Tim Kaine brings it to a vote, and we've heard that he may be doing that on Wednesday, and to also sign the resolution in the House, Resolution 38. Right now, last I saw, both Representative McGovern and Trahan and Presley were the only representatives in the House from Massachusetts who had signed. So, co-sponsored, please contact your representative and ask them to join them. And we heard from Senator Warren this morning. Oh, thank you, Bruce Bob. I'll get to that in a second. Bruce, we heard this morning from both Senator Warren and Markey that they both would like to sign on to the war powers resolution, but right now it's closed for them to do so. Tim Kaine has not opened that for co-sponsorship, but that they strongly support that and have made statements. Senator Warren actually was interviewed by CNN and made very strong statements opposing the United States attacking Iran. And Governor Healy and the Massachusetts legislature must resist any use of the Massachusetts National Guard by Trump against the people of Massachusetts. Of course, as he has called their use in California. So we're asking you to also sign the what is below statement to our representatives, both at the federal and state level. Also, please ask them to demand that aid is delivered into Gaza by UNRWA. It's so very clear that by word and by deed, Israel will not allow aid to be delivered except in a trickle by them and in cahoots with the United States. And then, as we all know, they shoot at the people in Gaza who do attempt to get that aid. So I'm also asking the people, when they call their representatives and senators, that you make that ask also. Cole or Linden, do you have any other asks that you would like to make at this time? And Cole will be dropping this into the chat and also send this along. We'll send this along with the recording to everybody who's registered.
Yeah, if everyone could fill this out, we'd appreciate it. Within the last hour since we've been on the webinar, Trump did announce a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, apparently mediated by Qatar. If it holds, that will be good news. But we still want to push this. We still want to apply pressure to make sure Congress doesn't let this one pass.
And even if that's his word today, that might not be what he says tomorrow. So they should know where their constituents stand and support them for doing when they do take right actions. Okay. So now is an opportunity for people to ask Linden questions, make some comments. If you do have comments you'd like to make, I request that you keep them short, at least until everybody's had the opportunity to ask questions that they would like to ask. And Noble has been monitoring the chat. I don't know if there are questions that are in the chat. I actually don't see.
Well,
here.
I would encourage people to put your questions in the chat. There's one from Herbert Weiner about making the Middle East a nuclear-free zone. I think everybody would like to see that happen, but I don't know if Linden has any comment on that. Linden, I will just throw out a couple of just thoughts I had on which listening to you talk about the particularly the water resources being denied to Palestinians. So water being used as a weapon. I've seen water kind of being used as a weapon the other way. And an example was in the indigenous people in northern Wisconsin, their lands were flooded back in the 1920s. This is the Ojibwe to create a dam and flood control, I guess. But it just happened to be the lands that had been ceded to them by treaty in the mid-1800s. So water was weaponized against them. And it's also been done in Canada, I think, with some of the huge hydroelectric projects up there. So I don't know if you have any comments on that. And one other thing I just throw out before I turn it back to you. I know that back in around World War I, when the Versailles Treaty was being negotiated, people like Lloyd George, who was the prime minister and heavily involved, obviously, in the Versailles Treaty, was using biblical terms in describing how Palestine would be divided between the French and the British. At least that was kind of the negotiation going on at the time. But he used biblical terms. The French were more realistic and political. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think your example about the dam building, I mean, there's been a significant amount of sort of dam dismantling going on for a number of reasons, in North America. But yes, I think that the creative weaponization of all kinds of resources in order to removal of indigenous people from their land, whether it's to create a reservoir or homesteading, and sequestering resources of all kinds, and just freedom of movement. That was really startling to me in Palestine. We went to this Waldorf Hotel, which is right near the wall, the separation wall in Bethlehem, that's filled with Banksy art. And there's a museum in there. It's a museum of the occupation. And in one of the cases, it showed the different kind of permits that Palestinians have to get in order to be able to move routinely from one place to another. So, doctors have to get a permit to accompany a patient. A farmer has to get a permit to cross the road to go to his land. So this kind of apartheid control, it's not, used to, as you say, weaponize resources, but also just weaponize access. And the kind of diabolical creativity of the various ways that they do that is really mind-boggling. And as far as nuclear free, I mean, Iran was negotiating in good faith, as we know, right? And these allegations about Iran developing atomic weapons, I mean, I've seen charts online, and you may have seen them as well, that these have been asserted since the 90s, right? That this has been the threat that's been used to mobilize our forces and mobilize our military might to move them to that part of the world, when Trump's own advisors tell him that this is just not true. And so I think it's really important that we understand that it's important for us to stand up to this administration, to continue to assert our First Amendment rights, to get out in the street. And I strongly suggest that people look in your neighborhood if there's a Jewish Voice for Peace chapter there, or if there's a Palestinian or Muslim group there, to go and visit in a respectful way, without having any expectations or any demands, but to go as a guest, to learn, and to be with your neighbors. I mean, I think that's an action that anybody can take wherever you live. And it can be a powerful antidote to the siloing of us and the attempts to make us distrust and hate each other.
Right. I also have been over many times, and my first meetings with my members of Congress, both my representative and my senators, were with staff, telling them stories about what's actually happening on the ground. And that helped educate them in ways that they, in things that they didn't know about, because within at Congress, that's not been the narrative. And one example was when I was in the Jordan Valley, I went with a Palestinian and 2 Israeli Jews who went every single Saturday into the West Bank to stand with Palestinian shepherds, and who said that they understand a lot of Americans want to support the Jewish people, but why are they supporting the Israeli government? Why don't they support the Jews who are trying to fight for justice for the Palestinians? And on that day, we went to the top of a mountain in the Jordan Valley, which is sort of like the breadbasket of the West Bank and perhaps all of Israel and Palestine, and showed us that the water used to come gushing from the mountain top, beautiful fresh water, in a wooden chute that went all the way down the mountain. And the Palestinians, the young man who brought us there, said that when he was a boy, his parents would go and his mother would go, and other mothers would go and their children would go, and they would gather water and play in the water in the chute as it went down. But then, when we saw it, it was completely dry, completely empty. And beside it was a pipe attached to a pump that went into the mountain right beside the chute, that went to an Israeli water pump that then shut the water down to Israeli settlements on Palestinian land, that are on Palestinian land. If they have stolen Palestinian land and used that water to grow their own crops. And it's just devastating to the Palestinians who have been there for centuries. So stories like that people hear from you or read, are helpful for us to know, for us to tell our friends and family, neighbors, and our members of Congress also. I had one other comment, but Noble, I wanted to know if there's anyone else in the chat who has a question.
Well, let's see. I'm still looking. Well, I'm going to throw out a question myself, just because I know, Linden, you visited a Christian community, and if you read the books, some of the early people like Balfour and Lloyd George, who laid the groundwork for this catastrophe, were some of them were kind of fundamentalist Christians, and I don't know if that was just a front that they used for their political ends, and maybe it was. But to what extent has the Christian community been kind of devastated by what has happened in the last few years?
Yes, it has been. I mean, the Christians used to be 22% of the general population there. Now they are 2%. So it's pretty horrifying, what's happening to them. And yeah, I mean, there's no future. It's so devastating for the young people. Although the resiliency is amazing. I mean, we visited a university that was started in Bethlehem by Mitra Raheb, who is a Palestinian pastor and theologian, who actually was here a year ago, April. And this university is dedicated to the arts and including cooking and a number of different art forms. And it's a beautiful university, although the architecture is distinctive, but it had been attacked by soldiers and damaged. The structure was damaged, but they keep building. They keep building. I don't think the Waldorf Hotel is shuttered, but it was opened especially for us because of Omar's connection with them. Like I don't think they're receiving guests because there are not most, there's not enough tourists to open business. Like it costs more to be open than they will take in. So people are really starving. I did see a question in the chat about our own immigration issues with Palestinians here. And I think that is definitely directly tied to all of this. All of this is connected. And I have begun wearing a button that I got recently that says, I stand with immigrants. And I've been wearing it everywhere. And it's quite interesting how it's changed my experiences moving through the world, both in dealing with immigrant folks and white folks. So I think there's, we need to stand together. It's really heartening to me to see the resistance by the communities who are being most targeted in this country. Like they are turning out in their neighborhoods to force the ICE workers, out of their neighborhoods. I'm seeing, different posts by just the people turning out with their phones, and they're turning out in large enough numbers that the ICE workers are intimidated by them. And we need to do more of that and be ready to do more of that. Anything else in the chat, Noble?
I think we're asking that questions go into the chat. I see a hand raised, but I think we're not calling on people to my knowledge. So if you have a question, put it in the chat. I guess.
Well, Anthony Zuba asks, are there any ways we can help to get food and medicine and other essential supplies to Gaza and West Bank effectively? Have all ports of entry been cut off entirely?
I think they have. And what's really, I have friends who have been going to the region for decades, and they have connections in Gaza. And what they are doing is collecting money to go to folks to be able to buy what's already in Gaza because it's so expensive because of the scarcity. And that's heartbreaking because, then you're helping, individuals, but you're not maximizing the resources that are available to everyone. You have to find ways to bring pressure to bear on our government. It's our government that is responsible for this. And I have a real hard time with so many forms of resistance that we have been using because they all seem to be ineffectual. But I am a person of faith also, and I do find that when I ground myself in my faith, and that takes time, I am given paths forward that are effective. And I'm saying this out loud to myself as much as to anybody else here, because I think it's the way forward for me. And I would respectfully submit it's the way forward for each one of us. Because as I meant to say earlier, I don't know if I said this, but I think it's our self-will and our reliance on our self, intellect, our small human intellect, that's gotten us the place where we're in existential crisis in a number of dimensions, and we have to start acting and looking in other directions.
In talking with Muslims, it seems like part of the reason why they are able to maintain their sanity and stay grounded is they pray 5 times a day.
Yes, and that's what Mother Teresa said, that she and her nuns would have to pray 6 hours a day in order to be able to spend the other 4 doing really hard direct action.
Right. So Karen Steele also, who is a fellow UU, put into the chat here that the World Central Kitchen is now getting food into Gaza.
Oh, good.
I don't know.
Good. Yeah, I think we have to keep our ears to the ground because things change from day to day, and so that's hard. but yes, I also see that she says that attacks and demolitions have drastically increased. I mean, Mother Isaac was here a couple months ago on a book tour. His new book, Christ in the Rubble, has just come out, and I saw him speak at Harvard. And during the question and answer period, someone asked him, "What's going to happen?" And he said, "Well, the two-state solution, the two-state solution has been dead for a very long time." And he said, "I'm terrified to think this. I'm terrified to say this out loud. But the one-state solution is happening, and it's terrifying." But he said there are no Arabs in the Jordan Valley anymore. That's inside left.
I'm sorry, there are no what in the Jordan Valley?
No Arabs.
Oh,
He said there are no longer Arabs in the. That's what he said. That they're being chased out. I mean, I don't know if you saw about Masarayata, the community that was featured in the Academy Award-winning film "No Other Lands," and they have been under attack, particularly during these attacks on Iran. So, and terrifying. I mean, Omar has been targeted. I mean, he was recently featured on Israeli TV, and bottles and stuff like that had started being thrown at the office in East Jerusalem. The educational bookshop in East Jerusalem was raided twice, and their owners were detained. And because of the massive outcry of internationals of all stripes, I think the Israelis were really stunned. But I fear, I showed you some pictures of Ramallah Friends School. I mean, that was started by Quakers in the early 1900s. And it's a prestigious school that those three young men who were shot in Burlington had graduated from, And I'm not, many of us here, I think, have friends, there. And this is what Isaac was saying, that this is, no one is safe, right? That this is happening, and it's escalating. And unless we can stop our government somehow, it's termination and expulsion for everyone there.
I know that there are organizations like Rebuilding Alliance that have been serving meals for the past year and a half, well, actually before then. And they are now having, the webinars, but conversations with people in Gaza. So even when they can't get food, at least it's possible to talk with them and know that people are doing what they can to support them.
Yeah, I would also recommend, I mean, Sabeel has two events weekly at 11 o'clock on Tuesdays, which is Kumi Rising. Kumi means Kumi now. Kumi means rise up. When they host usually a Palestinian person, professional person, who comes to talk about their work on the ground. And it's a way to be in solidarity with them while getting educated about what is going on in the day-to-day life of people there. And the other one happens on Thursdays at noon. And you can find out about both of these by going to Friends of Sabeel North America, FOSNA, FOSNA.org. Yeah. And on Thursday is a prayer service. Excuse me, but it is Christian. It's welcoming to everyone, and there are Palestinians that attend this as well as people from other parts of the world. And the format includes a series of descriptions of events that have happened the prior 7 days on the ground, perfect things that have been happening, and then intercessory prayer. So it's a way of being together and facing the facts on the ground that are beyond words in many instances, and yet being together and being faithful together, and holding each other and staying together and believing that things will change if we can do it.
It may be relevant to realize that Sabeel had 5 different delegations going in June, to Amman, to take the Alni Bridge to Jerusalem, and they were all canceled when Israel bombed Iran. I would have been on one of those delegations leaving last Saturday. So I think, yes, Sabeel is a very strong, wonderful organization.
Yes, yes. They were conducting 3 to 4 delegations a year before October 7th. And since then, they've had a minimum of 1 per month and often more than that. And so they're one of the few organizations that is continuing to guide delegations on the ground. I'm sorry, Noble, I think I interrupted.
Yeah, I was just checking the chat. Marcus Hyde actually has a rather lengthy question. It's interesting. It's about the doctrine of discovery, and he has a number of points here, but I'm going to ask his first one. He's interested in excuse me.
I see. Yes.
Is there any literature? Is there any literature about how Zionism took inspiration from the doctrine of discovery? I'd be interested myself in the Ruth Bader Ginsburg decision that cited it. So
Yeah.
those are 2 questions.
Yeah. So I actually don't use the word Christian for myself, because I've learned from liberation theologians that the very word Christian has signified the alignment of church and state for centuries. And I resist that alignment. But I am a follower of Jesus. And but I don't know a lot about Jewish Zionism. there's many things, this is only my first trip there. So there's a lot, I have a lot to learn. But Christian Zionism preceded Jewish Zionism, as in the account that I just gave you. That the formal beginning of Jewish Zionism was really only articulated in the 1840s. But this narrative of the epic, these are like our creation myths, right? Of chosen people, promised land. I mean, that's a narrative that is embraced by Christians and by Jews. And it's legitimate because it comes right out of the mouth of the scriptures that we take as holy. So it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And I'm continuing to do my best to investigate how theologians are dealing with that. I mean, I will say there's a wonderful Jewish theologian, Mark Ellis, who passed last year. And actually, he also was very aligned with the Catholic worker movement. And he wrote books about Dorothy Day. I didn't even make the connection at first, but I was familiar with his books about the Catholic worker, but he's also a practicing Jewish. And yeah, he wrote for Sabeel. He was amazing. And he talked about, and I haven't read his books, it's on my list of things to do, but he talked about this situation, the conduct of Israel as being the end of ethical Judaism. And that hit me really hard. I think that faith needs to have the guts to say that this is the end of ethical Christianity. This is the end of ethical Catholicism. This is the end of ethical Methodism. This is at the end of, Unitarian Universalism. Because it just is. I mean, it's a total violation of the very, fundamental belief.
I'd actually like to raise a couple points about that. One is, it's my understanding, and I'll need to look into this and include it in the follow-up email, that after World War II, and actually this is what I said to a couple of settlers in Hebron, after asking them, how can they do what they're doing to the Palestinians after what happened to the Jews in the Holocaust? And one of them said, well, we're just doing what you did to the American Indians.
Right.
And the other one said, well, we don't have any gas chambers or ovens, as if they can exterminate people by a different way. It's okay. But one of my response was, I need to double check and make sure it's accurate, was that after the horrors of the Holocaust, when the people of many countries around the world came together to create international law, they said no longer could a country grab the land of another country through conquest because they could. And even though many people still believe in the doctrine of discovery and quote that, it's actually not legal according to international law. And I will look into that and follow that up. But that would not be.
That is absolutely true. It is totally against international law, Geneva Convention,
Right.
United Nations Charter, everything. Totally
Right.
against.
Right. So I will add some of that to the chat for people. But it's not the first time that there are arguments within denominations about what is true and what is not true. I think that it is true that those who are Christian and those who are Muslim, what I know about Islam and most religions, is that every person is holy, and to do harm to another person is against that religion. And that people, one of the reasons why a lot of people don't like religion is that so much evil, so many crimes, so much hurt is done in the name of religions, which is actually inconsistent with the basic belief of those religions. So, I mean, I know evangelical Lutherans, for instance, who are doing wonderful work in Palestine. So it's not all evangelicals. And
oh, right. And it's, I mean, Jews are definitely leading the resistance, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. Right. Saying that this is against, or anti, this is.
Yeah, it's
Sorry,
a
go ahead.
desecration of our faith, you know.
Right. So it is 8:24, and time to wrap. Do you have a closing statement you would like to make?
I wanted to say one more thing about the
Sure.
legal. I do recommend Stephen Newcomb's book. He's the Lenape lawyer, Pagans in the Promised Land: Decoding the Doctrine of Christian Discovery, and he also has many really great YouTubes that would be accessible to everybody. Although they might bear multiple watchings because it's hard and it's new stuff. But he's amazing. His analysis is very systematic and profound.
Will you put that in the resource list,
Yeah,
Linden?
it is. Yeah, it is there.
Okay. How about the Ruth Bader Ginsburg information? I think that was rather striking.
Yeah, I'll try to make sure that's on there too.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah,
All right. Well, it's time to thank everybody so we can end this on time. As we said early on, that the recording will be sent to everybody who registered, and that if you have a question that has not yet been answered, or you have a question that you think of between now and when you receive the recording, feel free to ask your question. Linden has agreed to read and address any questions that people asked that have not been addressed. And I also ask, I thank Linden so much for your wonderful life experiences and sharing them with us. And I also thank Noble for keeping track of what's happening in the chat. I thank Cole very much for your tireless work on so many peace issues, but especially in the past year and a half for all that you have done in your dedication to leadership on this particular issue. And especially to everybody in the audience who has come here this evening, and to those who will listen to the recording afterwards. These are dangerous days, but I believe that the future is yet to be determined, that it is up to the collective us, those of us here in this webinar, those of us in our different organizations, those of us across the United States, those of us around the world who are doing what they can in ways we have no idea what it is. And we're all creating a fertile ground that hopefully something will trigger a changing, so that we will, and I don't know that I'm optimistic about this, but I do have hope that it is still possible that if enough of us continue to pay attention and do what we can, that we might be able to create a more peaceful and healthy and sustainable world community. So wherever you may be, thank you so much for listening to this and for all that you do, and wishing you on the behalf of MAPPA a wonderful rest of your day or evening or good night.